Good evening and welcome to the Pompey Politics Podcast.
I'm Ian Tiny Morris.
And I'm Simon Sansbury.
And welcome to the latest episode of the Pompey Politics Podcast. And today we're going to tackle one of those big issues that affects local politics. And no, it's not parking or poo. They can stay on the back burner. But today we're going to have a look at one of the really big issues in the housing sector. And we're going to take a glance at houses of multiple occupancy, which for those of you who follow on the sort of message boards and the local political forums will know that this has become a really hot topic. So, Simon, what have we got?
So we've got, in a second, we've got a recorded interview with Councillor Hugh Mason, who's the Cabinet Member for Planning Policy. So we had a good chat with him earlier on today. But we are joined live through the powers of the internet, Councillor Ben Swann. Thank you very much for joining us, Ben.
Thank you for having me.
What we'll do is we'll play that interview, and then I'll build a picture about HMOs, so houses of multiple occupancy, and then we'll go through that. So let's get cracking, shall we? Let's hear what Hugh had to say. Joining us is Councillor Hugh Mason, who, among other things, is the Cabinet Member for Planning Policy in the City. So welcome Hugh, and thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you very much.
So I guess we need to kind of get an idea of what that role means. So among other things, as I said, you're the Cabinet Member for Planning Policy. What does that mean, and what does that mean you have responsibility for? You are like a planning god. What can you do?
I have oversight for planning. I am not the person who sits on the planning committee and makes planning decisions, but I have to make sure that planning decisions come timely. We've had a period in the past, not too distant past, when we were running very far behindhand, largely because of the nitrate directive and COVID. But I have to make sure that we've caught up and that we are going forward with normal day-to-day planning. The second thing I have oversight of is the construction of the new city plan. Our last city plan was 2012, and we are producing a new city plan to run to 2040. And so I have oversight of that, make sure that all the bits fit together, make sure that there are no political minefields that we're straying into. Make sure that we're meeting the needs so far as we can of the people of Portsmouth. And the last thing I have oversight for, although it's not technically in the portfolio, is the ongoing sea defences, because I've been concerned with sea defences in this city for the last 20 years. And I'm looking forward to seeing a good completion of them.
Fantastic. Well, it sounds like a very busy portfolio. Thank you.
But it keeps me out of the pubs.
Absolutely. So the area we're looking to focus on today, Hugh, is houses of multiple occupancy.
Yes.
And it seems to be causing quite a lot of concern for residents about the number of them or the density of them. Can you just give us an overview of what powers you and the planning committee might have to limit or control their development?
We've got fairly limited powers, but in a preamble, what I would say is that we're not going to get rid of HMOs anytime shortly, because A, there is a shortage of housing in this city and in the surrounding areas, and B, the price of housing is such that quite a lot of young people cannot afford to get onto the housing ladder without a very long time saving. And so a house in multiple occupation, it gives them a place to be, but without the additional costs of having to rent a huge flat. So they're with us for the time being, a very long time being, I would think. What powers do we have? Quite limited powers. In most councils, they don't have any powers at all. They just let them happen. Here we have what is, after an Article 4 directive, which is a technical term, which we introduced in November 2011, we have quite a lot of planning limitations, so that we will not allow new houses in multiple occupation if within 50 meters of the proposed house in proposed HMO, there are more than 10% of the houses as HMOs. We had thought of the possibility of reducing that to 5%, but the planning inspector at the government will not wear that. There are a couple of places which, for very peculiar reasons, because of their they are seafront areas with a lot of boarding houses, do have a 5%, but I think 10% is as low as we could legally go in this city. And so we try and control it that way. Also, we very carefully make sure that the rooms are of the right size, the facilities are of the right size. And since September, we have been requiring all of the HMOs, which are over 3 to 4 people in them, to be licensed. Until then, we only licensed the big ones, and now we're licensing them all. And that gives us at least an entree to make sure that the properties are in a good condition, that they are provide the right amount of facilities, that there is the right amount of space for people to live in. And so we try and we have some leeway, some powers to regulate them, but they are not particularly extensive.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you. So you kind of, it's almost like you deftly led into our next question in your response there, Hugh. So what needs so what needs to change to allow communities and councils to address bad or overdeveloped HMOs, or perhaps even, as you say, remove the need altogether? What are the fixes?
The long-term fix would be to build more flats, more houses, to have a bigger housing stock at a price which people can begin to afford. Until that happens, you are going to have houses in multiple occupation. How do we address bad or overdeveloped houses in multiple occupation? Well, that is what we're using the licensing system for, so that we license them, we make sure that the facilities are good, that they are not overdeveloped, so you're cramming too many people into the space. That is the tool we have. The other thing which we would like to do, and this is something which is being proposed to the Planning Inspectorate in our revision of the city plan, is that when you increase the number of people living in an HMO, if it is in an area where more than 10% of the properties are houses in multiple occupation within this 50-meter radius, just increasing this will not normally be allowed, and you'd have to make a very good case to increase the numbers in that house. So if you wanted to increase it, let's say, from 5 people to 8 people, you would have to apply for planning permission, which would not normally be granted. Now, this is something which, so far as I know, other places are not doing, but given the pressure in Portsmouth and the pressure of population on housing, we think is very sensible in this city.
And you mentioned that. Does that, and forgive me if this is an elementary question as a follow-up to that, does that kind of take, so most of the housing, so the HMOs, a lot of them seem to be for double rooms, for example, but are they then allowed to have a couple living in that room, therefore doubling, each room kind of therefore kind of doubling the occupancy. Is that what you're kind of speaking to there, or is it the number of rooms?
The application is for persons, not
Okay.
for occupancy.
Right. Okay.
The rooms are occupied. It's very difficult to police that, of course. You can hardly walk into a person's bedroom and say, "Oh, there are two of you here this evening." Well, that's contrary to the rules. But what the landlords, and there are some very good landlords of HMOs, be it said, I know of some very good ones, what they are applying for is the number of people in the house.
Okay.
This is important because the facilities over and above the bedroom, the kitchen, any living room is only really for a certain number of people.
Indeed. Thank you. That answers that one, Ian.
So Hugh, in our discussion, there's been lots of discussions online, and I think people acknowledge the council's attempt to try and sort of regulate and register the HMOs. What would you advise residents to do if they believe that there is an unregistered HMO either close to where they live? Because I think there were a number of people who were quite vocal that although this register exists, there are a lot more HMOs out there than perhaps the council know about.
There are certainly some out there that we don't know about. And if you suspect that, and if it is becoming a problem, or you see that it would bring the number in an area above the 10% threshold, then let the Portsmouth planning authorities know. Get hold of the city council, get hold of your city councillor, get hold of anybody that you can lay hands on and make that complaint that this is an unregistered HMO. Now, some of these places have been HMOs since before we introduced the Article 4 directive in 2011. And so they have a right to be there, even though they are not properly registered. But as of September, all HMOs should be registered if there are more than 3 or 4 people in them, 3 to 4 people in them, with the city council. And so we would take an interest in that as soon as it was reported to us.
Marvellous. I think, Hugh, always a very difficult area to cover in a city that has many more people living in it than perhaps the infrastructure was always designed for.
Oh yes, well, it's more than just the infrastructure. It is just that we don't have the space where we can build as many new homes as the governments would want us to meet their assessment of how many houses we need. We are bound to come well below that for the simple reason we just do not have the space. Now, the spaces we have, there are 1 or 2 spaces. Obviously, you've once heard of St James's Hospital. There'll be more. At some stage, there's going to be development on the St John's College in Southsea. We've still got to work out in detail what we're going to put on the western part of Tipner, but the eastern part of the Tipner Peninsula is beginning to be developed at the moment. Well, there are places, but we will never be able to approach the target which the government has set for us. It is impossible.
Thank you, Hugh. That's really appreciate you taking the time.
Okay, so really useful interview with Hugh there. I'll just raise a couple of points that sadly because of scheduling, we had to pre-record Hugh's interview, but as Elizabeth kind of raised in the comments, with the database itself for the HMO register at PCC hasn't been updated since February last year, and she questioned whether actually it's possible to cross-match that against the 2021 census. So we'll certainly ask you whether that's something that can be done. But it certainly kind of raises some points on that. Just to give a bit more background, sorry, Ben, before we leap into our questions with yourself, we've been contacted by various people who contacted us via Facebook. Some of whom quite concerned about the prospects of HMOs on their street, or indeed those with elderly relatives who kind of literally feel quite powerless to be able to do something about a seven bed HMO basically springing up next to them on a normally kind of quiet residential street. I know some of the things that Hugh kind of mentioned there was about were about the rules around them. One of the things that one of our viewers had also brought to our attention was that we'd seen a video, for example, on YouTube where a developer talks about, gives their example. So this was actually a video speaking about two developers in Portsmouth. We're not going to name them because at the end of the day, we've got no way of knowing what their developments are like for users or for residents. But just to kind of give those as an example of why developers are kind of into this sort of thing, they were citing examples of they'd take a 3-bed property, convert it into a 7-bed HMO, charging about £700 a calendar month for each room. Having purchased the property for around 200,000, spent a similar amount on updating it, and now it's the property's worth over 600,000, but it's going to be giving a return of just under 5,000 a month. So quite a sizable kind of return. But those rules at a 50-meter radius from the property, and these are the examples from the specialised planning information on Portsmouth City Council's website, and I'll put a link to that in a chat in a minute, where it talks about 50 meters radius, basically from the front door of the proposed HMO. How many other HMOs are there within that 50-meter radius, and what are they as a percentage of the number of dwellings? And if that's going to be 10%. Then that's an issue. That the rules don't allow for that, so it stops that idea. But the rules kind of provide for not for basically to allow HMOs to be a maximum of 3 in a row, but also not to sandwich another resident family property. So if you had your family home and you had an HMO on one side, an HMO couldn't then be put into place, couldn't get registration basically on the other side, because basically that would be sandwiching your family dwelling. Interestingly enough, we also looked at the database, and although as Elizabeth had pointed out, hadn't been updated since February last year, even on the information that is there, of the 4,300 odd HMOs across the city, 38% of them are in PO5, so that's kind of the southwestern corner of the city. 36% of them are in PO4, which is the southeastern kind of corner of the city, and then another 14% that's in PO1. So if you think PO1 is probably St Thomas and the bottom of Nelson, if we think kind of council wards, whereas PO4 is the bottom of Charles Dickens, and has got St Thomas and probably a bit of Central Southsea, and also St Jude, and then kind of PO5, kind of covering a bit of Central Southsea and Eastern Craneswater. But yeah, the rest of the city have very PO6. There's only 2%. PO3, which is the 3 wards off the island. So that's Paulsgrove, Cosham, Drayton, Farlington. Copner area is kind of PO3, so they're about 1%. So it kind of seems that they're all kind of clustered around kind of one part of the city. But just kind of speak to that, the video that we've been sent as kind of an example, that's kind of speaking to there being a potential in theory because of the number of properties across the rest of the city, that there might be room for another kind of 7,000 to 8,000 HMOs across the city. So trebling the kind of the existing number. So quite a big thing to kind of go into there. Did you have any kind of initial thoughts, Ben, before we get into the questions, or It feels like quite a long preamble on that one, so thank you for bearing with us while we kind of got there.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I mean, there are so many issues, even just coming out of Hugh's piece, that I could cover. But I think the questions are going to tease the responses for that out. So,
Okay.
you
Brilliant.
know, I think we'll cover everything we need to.
That's cool.
Perfect.
Brilliant.
So Ben, can you just share with us? Obviously, if those that don't know you, you are one of the ward councillors for the Copner ward. Now, as Simon touched on, the density is in the south, but there seems to be a big expansion coming north. So, can you tell us kind of what your involvement is and what your residents are telling you about the proliferation of HMO?
So, yeah, again, thanks for having me on. I am obviously the ward councillor for Copner and Anchorage Park. I live on the southern border of the ward, and by virtue of living there, I'm actually in the area that is at the moment most heavily affected by HMOs, and I don't think it's an overstatement to say that it is the preeminent issue that is being raised to me at the moment. Multiple occasions we're hearing stories of issues with drugs, people coming to the properties at all hours, during the day people not being able to use their gardens because of the prevalence of the smell of weed and that kind of thing. We're hearing about antisocial behaviour as far as violence. And I know certainly in one incident, actually very close to where I live, there was some antisocial behaviour going on at an HMO, and a resident lived next door and just basically asked for them to keep it down because it was 1-2 o'clock in the morning. And this gentleman was hospitalised because this is the kind of thing. These are always sold that they're young professional people going into these properties, but is that really the case? I'm not so sure. You've got a property full of sort of 7, 8, 9 people. Say nothing about the amount of guests that they have, people staying over and everything, which, as Hugh said quite rightly, it's unpoliceable. So to my mind, this is an issue that actually needs to be folded into planning policy to say, well, actually, you're signing off on a HMO for 7, 8, 9 people. They potentially could all have cars. Their guests could all have cars. So you could be looking at 14, 15, 16 additional cars, literally in the stroke of a pen. And quite frankly, in a city where green issues, air quality is really being shouted from the highest levels, why have we got a policy that are basically allowing more and more cars into the city? It makes no sense to me at all. You can't have it both ways. You just can't. The other issues you've got are, whilst these properties are being developed, you're starting to see sewage issues, raw sewage coming up through the drains in the street. We've had a road in our in Copner ward that people have had sewage coming up into their houses, and I know a number of them had to be basically evacuated prior to Christmas, very close to Christmas, whilst all this was cleaned up. We have a Victorian sewage system that is just not built to cope with the massive increase in people that are being added to it. You have 7, 8 toilets in a property, say nothing of sinks, etc. Of course, well, what do you think is going to happen? It's going to overload the system, and that is exactly what we're seeing. So there's just on this one, the final issue I will touch on is the issues with developers themselves. Now, I understand we live in the capitalist system and people want to make money, but we have on numerous occasions developers pressuring sometimes elderly and vulnerable people into signing party wall agreements. In the course of the development of these properties, you're seeing neighbouring properties sustain some fairly substantial damage that are leaving people unable to use their heating systems, the fires in their lounge as we go into the winter. Now, this is just, you know, we can't just say, oh, well, it's just one of those things that has to happen in the city. It is just not acceptable.
Thank you, Ben. Simon.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so and I think we'll tease out some more kind of detail on those. But as you say, that's a lot of things going on. So to kind of put that kind of personal level, you know, if my elderly relative's got a nice terraced house in a normal Portsmouth street, you know, it's a flat frontage street, and is terrified about the HMO application to convert the 3-bedroom house next door into a you know, a 5 or even more person HMO. What can we and their neighbours do? What power do the people have to try and stop it?
Well, my initial reaction is not enough, quite frankly. I always encourage my residents to get those objections in, speak to their neighbours, so everybody within that close community around that property is aware of it and they can have their say, because that's the most important thing, residents having their say. Now, whether those residents are listened to, that's another problem. But you know, residents, and they're told time and time again, oh, there's no point in objecting because nothing's going to improve. It's just going to go through. But if we just sit on our hands and we don't stand up for our communities and we don't stand up for our residents and say, hang on a minute, this is not right. We're elected to represent our residents, and our residents are telling us that this is an issue. Therefore, we are duty bound, we are morally bound to make that argument. So yes, make those objections, speak to your councillor, and where necessary, they can be called into the committee, so deputations can be given in person. Now, the frustrating part of this is we are limited as to what we can do. Now, Hugh said that there's not much they can do as a local authority. Within the local plan, yes, there are things that can be done. I fundamentally disagree with this notion that 5%, you know, isn't going to work because basically we don't fall within the planning inspectorate would poo-poo it and it's not going to go through. I think we have some very compelling reasons why we should be looking to make it 5% per 50-metre radius. We're an island city. We're the only island city in the country. So yes, Hugh is right in saying we need to be building more properties, but where are these properties going to go? Land is finite. That, you know, it's not an option to reclaim land. It's just not an option because of ecological reasons. It's not going to happen. So therefore, we need to say that, you know, this is, you know, there are limitations. Add to that we have a university that is growing year on year. And yes, massive amounts of student housing is being built. But what happens after year one? All of these students and people have got to live somewhere. So, of course, an element of HMOs are being used by the students. And you know, that's absolutely fine. The property's there. That's what they're doing. It's not I have no umbrage with the students. But the fact of the matter is, the local authority that was alluded to that were able to say, yes, okay, 5% is correct. In Essex, I believe they are, is because of there was a university and there was lots of residents that were being used by university students. Well, we've got the university, we've got a growing university. We know HMOs are used by students, but equally, as I said, we have a finite amount of land. There's nowhere to keep building these properties. So therefore, you know, we have special a special situation here, unique to us, that doesn't appear anywhere else in the country. So therefore, I think that's a cast iron reason to say, actually, yes, 5% is appropriate.
Sorry, Ian.
Carry on, Sam.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I was just again from the comments we've we've got Julie saying that some of the comments that they've seen objecting to HMOs applications are heartbreaking, and the personal stories of the impacts that's having on people's lives, and that people should join together to be raising their objections to these things. And Elizabeth makes another comment about not enough people knowing about the HMO application, and there's not enough consultation, and just the notice on a lamppost isn't really sufficient to warn people that sort of thing is kind of about to, without kind of wishing to use dramatic language, is about to, and this is my words, not hers, that's about to kind of hit their neighbourhood. There's quite a bit there. There's the severity of the issues that people are experiencing, and the examples that you've raised are very distressing.
Yeah,
sorry,
yeah, absolutely. The point that you are having 9 or 10 houses in a road of 40 plus houses, sometimes double, triple, even more than that, is the mind boggles. I'm sure it is the legal minimum requirement. However, just because it's the legal requirement, is it the right thing to do? No, absolutely not. As many residents in the road need to be made aware of these, and about adjoining roads as well, because obviously these developments affect properties in roads that are running parallel. So therefore, there has to be some kind of better communication apparatus put in place, because it is just not fit for purpose at the moment. And so that is an absolutely valid comment, and I completely agree. So yeah, communication is absolutely key, because these it seems to all the world that people are trying to get these applications in under the radar, and whether that is or isn't the case, that's what it looks like. We'll try and minimize the amount of objections, because we'll only tell a few people, and this putting posters on lampposts, etc., that after one bit of rain are illegible, just doesn't seem to make sense. So therefore, we could do this better. We could be better at this. Our communication could be fundamentally improved. It needs to happen.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I guess, Ben, as well as the developers obviously making significant profits, as kind of Simon's alluded to in that sort of preamble, the HMO appears to be satisfying a need. So I guess the question is, what is that need, and is there a better way? Do you think that need could be satisfied?
Yes, it is satisfying a need to a point, because obviously each HMO that's signed off goes towards the housing targets, and I get that. I don't agree with it, but I get it. But it just seems, what bothers me about it is it's a very sterile black and white process. Local communities, residents aren't involved fundamentally in any of the process that leads up to these developments. And is there a better way? Is there an easier way? Is there an alternative way? Not in a city like Portsmouth, particularly. As I said, we live on an island. Where's the land going to come from? And you could say, well, yeah, there's the argument for HMOs, but we need family homes in the city. Yes, everybody needs to be catered for. And it's not just a case of saying, well, okay, you let every road have as many HMOs as the planning policy states, that, and then you've got family homes, you've got HMOs. But the problem is the nature of these properties are driving people out of the city. I've seen it time and time and time again. People who have said to me, hi, great, hope everything's going okay. Don't actually live in the ward anymore because we've taken the decision to move out of the city because things have got so bad. And this is the reality. And it's not just one or two people. And at the moment, I know residents who I talk to on a regular basis. There's 3 or 4 of them who have put their houses on the market, which of course creates extra stress because that property could potentially be bought up. And while we're on the subject, I was contacted by a resident about 18 months ago who had had an offer accepted on a property in Cllr in the south of the ward, and they were really excited, and they got in contact with me and said, could I talk to them about schools in the area and of issues like that. And then a week later, I was contacted by them saying, we're so sorry, we felt like we wasted your time because a HMO developer came in with a higher offer, despite the fact they had an offer accepted. An HMO developer came in with a much higher offer and they lost the house. And they were excited to be moving into Cllr. They were looking forward to it. They were excited for the possibilities that were open to their children and everything. And it was ripped away from them just to satisfy the need to put money in a developer's pocket. It's not right. It is not right.
And you touched on it earlier, Ben. I do wonder, having looked at this today, how much of it's the ripple effect from the university, because when we were talking to Cal in the Charles Dickens report, they referenced the fact that a lot of large student developments had been sort of put up in the centre of the city, but they were really high value rents, sort of £800-900 a month, effectively for a bedroom. And looking at that demographic, it seems to suggest that a lot of the HMOs, perhaps as you touched on, are for the sort of second year, third year students who then move, are looking for something, let's be vulgar, a little bit cheaper. But would it be fair to say that ripple effect is now reaching Cllr and almost pushing families out of some of those wards?
Yes, absolutely. I think you're definitely seeing that ripple effect because, if you, as Simon pointed out, you look at some of the postcodes in the southern parts of the city and they are saturated. You've got some roads that, because of the rules before the current rules on HMOs have been brought in, are almost entirely HMOs. So of course, when developers are looking at the city, they're not looking at areas like that because they know that because of the 10% rule, they're not going to get it signed off. So everything is going to move further north. So we're seeing it in Cllr, we're seeing it in Hilsey. We're now starting to hear a few rumbles with Anchorage Park, and they're gonna have as many as they can possibly get in Cllr, and then it's just going to keep moving and keep moving and keep moving. But and here is an issue that I believe somebody touched on in the comments, and this is really important, that all the while all this is going on, the basis of approving HMOs is flawed, because you are looking at a HMO register that is wildly out of date. And I will say, I was at a planning committee meeting prior to Christmas in the autumn, and we were told by an officer that yes, the HMO register has been checked and it's all up to date. Well, not according to the HMO register that's on the website. What is it? Is it up to date, or are they just saying that path of least resistance? This is a major concern. You cannot say that we have a policy and we're going to base approving applications on this policy when certain facets of actions within that policy are not being followed or are not correct. And again, how do you fold in live applications into that? You put up a graphic that was an example of the 50-meter radius, and you saw the application property, and also existing. Yes, that's the one. So what if you've got 3-4 applications, live applications within that circle? How is that taken into consideration? It just seems that it is asking for things to slip through the net, and I would be sure that they would. And what do? Is the planning department going to say, oh well, actually, yeah, we need to go back and look at that, or we need to we need to say, okay, well, we need to dial that back? I don't think they are. We already know that the planning department are majorly behind on approving things. So, again, it goes back to this path of least resistance. They just want to get these applications out the door. And I can understand that to a point. When you've got a massive workload, you want to get through it. But you're talking about people's lives and their quality of living. You're talking about people who have got to deal with these developments. And just to say, oh, well, yeah, the system didn't pick up that there were live applications because it's not really, there is no check and balance for that, is not good enough. I'm sorry, but it is not good enough. As part of this local plan, that should have been one of the first things in the HMO realm, if you like, that should have been looked at, which is, right, okay, how do we sweep all of this up so communication with residents is much improved? How can we make sure that nothing falls through the gaps and that we're not approving applications whilst there are other houses in the area? And I'm absolutely telling you that there are property after property after property in the south of Copner that are either under application or they've been approved and are currently being working on. There's no way that it's going to be managed in a way that they can say, right, okay, well, these applications have got to be pushed out because, these other ones are going through. It's all just, what's the easiest way to do it, and I dare say, is there an element of, well, yeah, we can probably get away with this. We need the properties anyway. So, once it's done, it's done. It's not good enough. There are residents live in this city, not just in my ward, right across the city. They pay their council tax and they look to the council to represent them. And all they're getting is basically sit down, shut up. There's no point in you objecting. We'll tell you what it is that you want, what it is that is best for your area. And it is just, and I understand that there are rules from central government. And I will say, yes, I'm in the same party as the government, but I will, and I do criticise anything that is wrong and is going to affect my residents. It doesn't matter what party they are. Nobody gets everything right. And something that comes up quite frequently at planning committee meetings is, oh, it's all the government's fault. It's all the government's fault. Well, we'd love to be able to help, but blah, blah, blah. It's the government's fault. I don't really care whose fault it is. Make it better. Make the process better. Stand up for residents and say, yeah, we hear your concerns. We understand, you've lived in this area for 30, 40, 50 years. And now you're having to deal with these developments that are meaning you're not going to be able to use your garden, that you're going to have to deal with increased noise, increased waste, sewage issues, utilities. And, let's also fold into that doctor's surgeries, dentist surgeries. It's difficult enough to get appointments as it is. You're bringing in more and more and more people. It's not going to get any better. And I realise to a certain point that there's a political upside to some people to say, well, okay, we can keep highlighting these problems, but everything has to be considered. Everything, parking included.
Thank you. And to be fair, those are kind of the themes that we're seeing in the comments, and there's several ideas, and I won't kind of list them all because it's. And we'll pass them on to the council about ways that the communication could be better. So there's some great suggestions in there of some things. But yeah, again, Elizabeth is saying, all aspects of the community need to be taken into consideration. So many of the HMOs has a huge impact on many other services that PCC provides, housing options, social services, environmental health. So it seems like this is kind of just part of a wider thing, but it's but the impact is very, very, very personal when it happens. When it happens in your road or in your neighbouring road. So, how and other than saying badly, how does the council currently manage HMOs and applications for new ones? You've kind of alluded a bit there with what you were saying about what they should be doing around challenging that policy. How do they manage them now?
Well, I believe at the moment, obviously, with the licensing laws that have come in, many more of the properties are being licensed. So technically speaking, in an ideal world, issues should be being picked up on and dealt with under the remit of that license. I don't believe that is happening, whether that's a staffing issue or I don't know, but it doesn't seem to be happening because for people that have HMOs already and have issues, there doesn't seem to be any kind of solution. There doesn't seem to be any kind of way forward for them other than or perhaps get in contact with the landlord, etc., which is not an ideal solution by any means. So you're seeing, I see issues like some HMOs have access to garages and parking behind the properties in certain areas in the south of my ward, and you have residents actually blocking those. They'll leave their car there. So the residents contact me and say, well, this isn't good enough. Yeah, they say it's we can't access our garages and things like that, and the residents who are parking their car there basically say, well, we can do what we want. Where do they go? They can contact the council, and the council are saying, well, you really have to maybe speak to the landlords, etc. And it's just, there is a process there, but it needs massively improving. So residents feel that they have actually got a point that they can go to and say, hang on, we've got an issue. And almost always they are valid issues, I will say that. And, it's not beyond the realms of possibility that the residents, that these things can be resolved by somebody just coming and saying, okay, could you think of your neighbours, or just dialogue, basically, I think is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
But I think so I think there is a process in place, but I don't think it works particularly well. And as I said, I think it's a mixture of whether the resources are there within the council to do it, but also I understand, I can well understand from their point of view, it's not always going to be an easy thing to resolve. So sometimes it's a case of don't really know how to resolve this. So I think it's just left to kind of just to kind of flow on, really, without finding any kind of resolution to it.
So in this discussion, Ben, I think it looks like a very serious and a quite contentious picture. If we look at effectively the developers behind this growth in HMOs, is there ever a willingness to work with residents and yourself, or is it principally a sort of adversarial relationship?
I think, unfortunately, it's very much adversarial. I think it's a case of it's very hard nosed. The developers know what they want to do. They want to they want these properties sorted. They want to get them done as quickly as possible, as cheaply as possible, so they can obviously get people in and start making money from them. There doesn't seem to be any will to work with the community at all. I myself was asked by a developer, "Oh, come and have a look at one of my HMOs." I'm not quite sure what that developer thought that would achieve, because there are many facets as to why I have an issue personally and on behalf of my residents. So going to visit one is not going to change that. But it's the engagement is a real issue, because residents make objections, and it's public, obviously, on the portal and everything, and developers are picking up on this. And I know that residents have felt intimidated. Some of the builders, when they see them, they talk loudly about them. And as I have also mentioned, you have developers who pressure people into signing party wall agreements, which leave them completely exposed. And it just seems they want to get these developments done, come hell or high water. And as I said before, this is, you're seeing properties next door that are having damage to them, sometimes structural. You're having people not being able to use heating their fires, that they're being left with all sorts of issues that the developers are just not taking responsibility for. So it is an adversarial situation. It doesn't need to be that way. I mean, common sense would suggest that these developers want these developments to go ahead. So therefore, work with the community, talk to them a little bit and say, okay, I've got 3, 4, 5 of these properties in a certain area. I work with the local councillors, speak to the residents and say, let's have a meeting. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about what their concerns are. But it's a money-making factory. It just churns and churns and churns. And really that is the only game in town, is putting that money in their pocket. We hear often the deputations that are given at the committee meetings of how altruistic these developers are and how much they love the local community. They don't live in the local area at all. They don't, it's just, what's a good spiel to tell the committee. And it's not an exaggeration to say I've lost count of the amount of committees that I've, planning committees that I've given deputations at, but you hear literally the same. I could give it for them. I mean, I should start saying this to developers: don't worry about turning up, because I know exactly what you're going to say. I'll read it out for you. And this is that really defending an applicant? It's just, and the problem is the developers know that the system is massively biased to them. It's a rigged system, and they, and that is, it is what it is. It's not right, but they know that. They know the game. They know how to play it. And I dare say, I know some of the developers in the city have good relationships with councillors, and if I, to a point, I can't blame them for that. If I was a developer and I wanted to be developing in a certain area, I think I would probably make contact with the councillors. I think I would be more along the lines of how, what is the easiest and least problematic way of doing it. But then I think my mother says I was born at 60, so I have a slightly different view of the world than other people.
So, that might not make you a very successful developer, I think. So Simon, over to you.
Yeah, so just before the last question, to be fair, to reiterate the points you've made there, Ben, we're kind of seeing that in the comments where, people have identified that, essentially the developers know how to work within the system, and the 50 metres and 10% policy, there's still lots of latitude within that, and it's that policy that that needs changing. And as both you and Hugh have kind of mentioned to another comment, is that PCC seem to be just overwhelmed by the sheer quantity of the applications. But given the numbers that they were, to be fair, given the numbers that on the video that we listened to as part of our research, that there's definitely no chance of that kind of letting up anytime soon. So it's not like it's a blip that seems to be kind of going away. Another question that was asked was in the comments was, could PCC suspend all applications until they got the policy in the database sorted? Is that something they have the power to do?
Yes, it is something they have the power to do, and it's something that I've asked for on numerous occasions for the reasons I've stated previously, which is if the basis of how we form a decision based on the policy are not in order, then it would seem the logical thing that you would say, okay, well, we're going to need to pause this until, as you say, we get our house in order. Because if the information you're working on to say how many HMOs are there in a certain area, if that's not correct, then you're not making an informed decision, because the information is not correct. So yeah, and it can be paused because it has been done. It has been done before, but unfortunately there isn't the will to do that. And I think that is an element of that is the sheer workload that they have. And I think it's a case of, well, we've got to keep pushing these through because we're never going to get on top of it. But you raise a very valid point, which is this isn't going away. There's too much money in it.
Yeah, this is true. So I guess the $64 million question then is what changes would you want to see put in place to manage the situation better?
Well, first and foremost, I think the 5%. The 5% threshold per 50-metre radius, I think that would fundamentally cut down on the amount that there are. And Hugh is right. Hugh is absolutely right. We are never going to stop HMOs 100%. And neither would I want that. I have to be absolutely clear on that. I'm not, there should be no HMOs ever, but any development that happens within a community needs to, what's the word I'm looking for? Needs to be in sync with that community. It needs to enhance the community, or it needs to bring something to the community. We could get into the realms of talking about transient population versus current population, community buy-in, things like that, when you have a transient population, they don't have that dedication to the local community that long-term residents have. And I think there's an element of that. And I know residents have a serious concern about that. I also think adding to the policy that certain parts of the city, that basically a one-size-fits-all solution is not the way to go. Although we are a fairly small island, parts of the city are completely different from other parts of the city. So therefore, there needs to be specific planning approaches depending on where you're looking in the city. I think that would help. I think, as we've said, massively improved communication, community engagement, talking to residents. It's something that I know myself and my colleagues have done a constant dialogue with residents over HMOs. And, it's being honest with residents. It is incredibly difficult to get these applications stopped. But that doesn't mean our voices can't be heard. And it doesn't mean that we shouldn't stand up for other communities and say, right, okay, we're not going to go quietly. We're going to make a noise and we're going to say, hang on, we're not happy about this. And it is exactly the right thing to do. I think there does need to be a better engagement with the planning department, with residents. Again, it all comes under this communication, because residents need to be sure that their council is working for them, rather than saying, well, these developments are going to happen. It is what it is. We officers as well as councillors, we all work for the residents of Portsmouth. And I just think it's just all too quickly forgotten. And that really needs to be the crux of everything we do. We're not going to, we're not going to agree on everything. We're not going to be able to say, oh, yeah, we can solve the HMO problem overnight. But when residents understand what the situation is, they understand the limitations, they have an input into how their community is going to grow, where they're going to go, what things are going to look like, then it brings everybody along. And I think at the moment that is a fundamental flaw. It's that the residents, their council see them as an inconvenience, a hindrance to development in the city, and it is completely wrong. It is completely upside down. We need to be bringing, as I said, we need to be bringing residents with us, and basically that is the best and most fundamental way that this city is going to improve, and we're going to solidify our communities and make things better. I know it all seems very kind of idealistic, but I firmly believe that. I firmly believe that.
Brilliant, Ben. Thank you ever so much. A really complex and challenging topic. So thank you so much for giving us your time, and thanks to everybody who's been chipping in and keeping Simon busy online with all the comments during the show. You've been listening to the Pompey Politics Podcast. I've been Ian Tiny Morris.
And our guests have been, earlier on, we had the recorded interview from Councillor Hugh Mason, and joining us live on the stream,
it's Councillor Ben Swann for Cotner and Anchorage Park.
Thank you, Ben. I've been Simon Sainsbury, and thank you very much for everyone that's taken part in the comments along the stream. It's really been a lively topic, so we'd like to see kind of what comes out of that conversation, and some of those those points that have been made that we haven't been able to kind of explore. We'll put forward to the council and follow up for listeners and viewers what their responses are. But thank you very much for joining us. You can catch us next time at 6:27 on Sunday, live on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn and Twitter, or X. But you can also listen to us wherever you get your podcast. So please do remember to like us, comment, subscribe to the stream, or subscribe to us on YouTube, or just send tea and biscuits, because those are also quite appreciated. Always like a bit of tea and biscuits. So thank you very much, and join us next week at 6:27.